morning or good evening, depending from where you're joining us today. I'm Lydia, and this is my colleague Jose, and we're very happy to welcome you today to our webinar on behalf of the OECD and the New Professionalism and the Future of Teaching team. The future of teaching, that's what we want to talk about today. We see that across the OECD and also beyond, the teaching profession is kind of evolving. Today's educators are much more than learning facilitators. They're also data users, collaborators, they're mentors, and quite often they're also drivers of educational change. We actually have two pretty interesting examples of that with us today. And yeah, basically we think that this expansion of roles reflects a growing recognition that teachers, their knowledge, their experimentation, their creativity, and their professional judgment are and should be at the center of educational change. But it also raises a couple of important questions. How can teachers, when so much more is demanded from them, be actually supported in this? What kind of career structures do they need? What kind of support systems? And maybe what kind of shifting cultures as well? Basically, we're asking ourselves, what does a sustainable and also attractive teaching career look like in the 21st century? So these are the questions that we've been exploring over the past 4 years in our project. Together with systems like Wales, the Flemish community of Belgium, and Austria, we've been investigating what a kind of renewed vision or version of teacher professionalism might look like, one that recognizes teachers as agents of change and drivers of educational change, and also one that supports them so that they can actually thrive in that role. We're right now at a moment where we're synthesizing this work from the past 4 years, and there is one topic that has emerged as one of the most powerful but also most complex ones, and that is innovation.
Yeah, exactly. So today we're taking a moment to reflect on how innovation in teaching can be nurtured. Nurtured in classroom, in schools, but also in society and across systems. We know that meaningful change rarely begins with top-down policies alone. It often starts with experimentation by teachers, by schools, and through research that challenges existing assumptions. And our conversation today try to follow that progress. We'll begin with two educators who are pushing boundaries in their own practice and school communities. From there, we'll look at how collaboration between teachers, between researchers, between policymakers can look like when it comes to incorporating new technologies like AI, such a hot topic nowadays, and what that means for education, for teachers' opportunities and responsibilities. And finally, we'll zoom out even further to consider the societal level, the kind of policies and investment needed to sustain and scale innovation. So we mentioned that innovation often begins in the classroom, and so that's where we want to start this conversation today. Our first panelist today is Francisca Elgueta, and we are very pleased to have you here, Francisca. Francisca has taught in vulnerable communities in Chile for over 10 years, focusing on building student academic confidence, agency, and civic engagement. And this, of course, didn't go unnoticed. Francisca received the Global Teacher Prize Chile in 2022 and was named one of Chile's 100 Young Leaders in 2023. Today, Francisca is leading Escuela Global, a foundation that empowers teachers nationwide to deliver meaningful learning experiences that nurture critical and creative citizenship. So, Francisca, thank you for being here today and welcome.
Hi, everyone. Well, it's an honor to be here. And thanks for having teachers being represented in this discussion. It might sound obvious, but sometimes it's not. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's really our pleasure. Thank you so much for being available, also in a pretty busy time, of course. And we actually have a first question for you already, because we know that in your work, you've emphasized the importance of really building agency and student confidence and kind of basically making students feel that they have the world a little bit more in their reach than maybe sometimes in other educational contexts. And we know that you've worked extensively in contexts that are a bit more vulnerable and quite often with students that feel excluded in educational settings. So we've been wondering how you manage to innovate specifically in these complicated contexts and how you engage students in that.
Great. So first, a bit of context. I've been working throughout my whole career in highly vulnerable and marginalized contexts. The last few years focusing on reintegration schools. So reintegration schools are schools for students who have been excluded from the traditional school systems. Most of them are in youth prison or come from rehab or are homeless, many of them living in the streets, or moving from foster families or this state system for their houses. So you can imagine how challenging this is. But it's actually in these schools where I've learned the importance about innovation and engagement for students. So if I had to resume this like in two main ideas, the first one would be innovation is not equal to technology, right? I think innovation today is about making sense of the curriculum by connecting it with real world issues, focusing on global and local problems, right? Our students actually have a lot to say about the fragility of democracy, about human rights, about conflicts and wars that we are witnessing, have a lot to say about climate crisis, about how to promote tolerance. So in my experience and by watching also other teachers, I realized that our students need to have like real and significant and deep learning experiences where they have the opportunity to research, to recognize others' perspectives, to learn to communicate effectively, and especially to take action. Our students don't need to wait until they are adults to bring their own questions, to create solutions, and to participate and become active citizens. And it is then when we bring these experiences of learning to the classroom where they make sense of themselves, where they learn that they are important citizens and that their voice matters, right? And examples of this are tons, but I know there are really other interesting panelists here. So, and the second idea about this is that we need to install high expectation cultures, and especially in marginalized communities. Yeah, and how does this high expectation culture? How do we see them, and how do we practice them? First, on how we as adults model high expectations, like how do we as teachers refer to our students? How does the material and resources that they are having in the classroom, how does it look like? How does their classroom looks like? Yeah. Second, it also is about unconditionally loving them. Our students are going to make mistakes. That's all about being young and about being kids, right? So how we show them unconditional love by challenging them every day and giving them like a fresh start every day. About having routines, about setting clear expectations, about making the classroom a safe space to learn, right? And also it's about being able to take our students into the world and bringing the world into the classroom. We need to take our students to learn from their communities, from different people, bringing different people and different professions into the classroom and helping them make sense of what they're learning, right? So yeah, that's a bit of it.
What an inspired first answer to this webinar.
What a way to kick this off.
Exactly. You talk about, in this context, the importance of innovation and engagement, and also you talk about watching other teachers. You've worked a lot with other teachers in collaboration with them, especially in the last few years with the Escuela Global. Based on that experience, what kind of professional learning and institutional cultures best support teachers in trying these new approaches?
Great. So first, and one of the most important, it may sound really obvious, but actually it's not, is that we teachers need to learn and share experiences with other teachers, right? There's a problem that many times professional development for teachers is being taught by people who are actually not teachers, right? And it also has the effect that teachers often work in isolation, right? They do not share their best practices with one another. So the problem that one teacher is having in one classroom is being solved by the teacher in the next classroom, and that's not being shared, right? It also helps like demystify this idea that being a good teacher is kind of a gift, right? Because we believe that the good teacher, the one that is able to manage the classroom, to give instructions effectively, is someone who has that as a gift. And that's a mistake. Being a teacher is something that you learn and that you develop, right? And many times that is not being taught at our professional development or in our undergraduate education, right? So first, I would say that it's really, really important that we as teachers have the opportunity to learn from one another. And that's what Escuela Global has been doing throughout Chile and throughout Latin America. And it has been like really revolutionary. And teachers have been really engaged about the idea of learning from one another. And if we talk about institutional cultures, then I would say that for me, and this is my experience, where I've had the most like successful experiences as a teacher and where I felt best as a teacher is at the schools that have really good leaders, right? And if we need to continue discussing about education and really focusing on making education better, then we need to discuss about who are the leaders at schools, like who are helping them, how are they professionally developing? Because when you have a good leader, you have teachers working with one another. You as a teacher understand that you don't have to know it all. Yeah, I think teaching is one of the few professions that on the first day that you just like left college, you went into a classroom and you were completely abandoned there, right? No doctor would be left to make a surgery by himself on the first time, or not architect would be building a huge tower by itself. So teaching needs to be with one another, needs to be developing. And I really believe that leaders have that power to create cultures where making mistakes, where we continue learning, where we learn from one another, and where we work as a team. So I think that's the most important factor of institutional culture. Of course, there are tons of others. Of course, there are tons of issues to discuss about teachers, about our salaries, about the systemic problems. But if we had to begin with one, then leaders would definitely be, for me, the most important one.
Yeah. Well, that is a perfect transition, actually, because we have a very innovative and quite exceptional school leader with us today as well. And this is Pete van der Velde. Very happy to have you with us today, Pete. Hi.
Hello, and likewise, I'm very honored to be a part of this webinar.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So you actually lead a school in Brussels with I hope I pronounce it right, quite funky name, Atheneum Go for Brussels for business in Brussels.
Perfect.
And you and your team are there rethinking what it means to prepare students for the future in a pretty pragmatic sense, I would say. So you're grounding learning in entrepreneurial thinking and real world skills. Sounds quite exciting.
Pete, we've heard that innovation at the school level often requires reconciling competing demands. So we have curriculum expectation on one side, accountability on the other side. We also have the community concerns. So how do you balance navigating through these tensions and pushing for innovative programs and that better prepare students for the future?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's a real tension between innovation and accountability per se. I more see it as between short-term metrics and long-term learning. And so we need to adjust our own definition of what success in a learning environment is to understand it. I might be the odd one out here in this group, because I didn't always wanted to be a teacher or to be in education. More likely, I was heading toward a different path. I was working as a journalist prior to this, and I started working here. So what I always expect as a teacher, and then as somebody, as an education professional, is be a part of society. My school is in Molenbeek, so it's a very underprivileged part of Brussels. Our students are underprivileged students and with fewer opportunities. And I can relate to what Francisca has previously said. I have to cope with the same amount of problems on a daily basis with my students. But what I noticed is, when I looked around Teachers Lounge, most teachers looked like me. And parents were nowhere to be found. So that creates a big gap between one end what school is, other end what society, culture, and Brussels is. And the first thing is to find a bridge and to make constantly bridges between your new teachers, between your pupils, between your parents, and between every institution that can add on to this success story that we're slowly working on, because it doesn't always have to be with speed. You have to have a vision on a long term. That's why I would almost declare, do not celebrate quick wins. I know it's a faux pas to say in education to celebrate every win that you get. No, work around the vision, because you really have to work on a long-term project, especially when you're working on schools, and you have to tinker, not really revolutionize everyday learning, but you tinker to adjust to the needs that are put into place with your specific situation that you have. So that's why I see our school as a sort of they have a beautiful word in German, Gesamtkunstwerk, or a work that you all chip in together for your own little part. And that's what makes this school work for the moment, because we all know, we have a vision that we all subscribe to. Everybody's involved here, and we work with the same principles. And the next idea comes from actually the same mindset, is that the form should follow the function. And especially in teaching, in mapping your own curriculum, that's something that's very important if you want to have success on a sustainable long-term scale.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you. We also wondered, and that relates a little bit to what Francisca just said, on the leadership and managerial level, basically, how do you manage as a school leader to basically engage your staff and to maintain this kind of collective ownership of change? And then also, I mean, you said you tinker a lot in how you can actually, innovate in your school. Basically, how do you maintain this sort of momentum that goes beyond a single project or beyond a single initiative?
Yeah,
so what's the management perspective on this?
Management's perspective is, I want to be lazy. I'm really striving the right to be lazy. When I started here, I said my dream is to read my newspaper every day for 1 hour and then go into business. Then I know what the society is doing and I can adapt my school to society. Because I have trust in everybody who works here. I have trust that they're educational professionals and that they act in such a way. And that's how then you're distributing your own leadership. Then you're setting up professional learning communities. Those things are very important. And then you can, from that on, you can start pilot programs, and then that stakeholder engagement will rise. And you have not only formal leaders, but informal leaders. And that's how, when they have to interact with one another, from the function that they have at the school, they will go to real learning. I can go and visit every hour, every class, and make a nice checklist what everything should be done. But that doesn't really help in gaining the trust of everybody here at my school. Because well, it's not very much different from teaching in the end. You have to trust your students that they will be self-sufficient enough to complete those tasks. Well, same for us, and they learn more from each other and from the students that they do from me. I have a vision. I can give them the entire backstory, how and why we should do it, and I'm here to enable that they have the means and everything that's necessary to go to that place and work in that vision. But the dialogue is key.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. I think we've heard a lot about like this idea that really trust is basically the key ingredient to like make any ecosystem work, and especially in innovation that's necessary. And it's also something that might lead us directly to our next panelist, where we want to talk about a quite specific form of innovation that sparks a lot of hopes and a lot of skepticism, and that's artificial intelligence. So we're very happy to introduce you to Inge Molenaar, who's with us today. Hi, Inge.
Hey, good day.
Hi. So Inge, thanks a lot for being here. We know you're a very busy woman. Aside from your role as Professor of Education and AI at Radboud University in the Netherlands, you're also the director of the Dutch National Education Lab AI, in short, NOLAI, NOLAI.
NOLAI,
yeah. NOLAI. Okay. So at NOLAI, you connect education, science, and business to develop evidence-based prototypes, basically. And you also research the consequences of consciously and responsibly using AI in education. So what you're doing quite often in your work is trying to carefully find a path forward and exploring how AI can be integrated into educational practices, but also thinking quite critically about how teachers can lead that development.
And we've heard that AI is often framed as a fresh wind in education, but there are also some other voices that that goes against this freshness of the wind. Some voices worry about AI not really being the sort of innovation that we need, the one that makes teaching more inclusive, more tied to real-world challenges, or more empowering. So what's your take on this? Can AI be integrated into educational practices to steer the kind of innovation that transform education in a meaningful way? And if so, how can we do it?
Yeah, very good questions.
Not
I wish I had all the answers for you, but thanks so much for the invitation, and also great to be here and to write a future perspective for you on that element as well. Yes, I think it can actually have that function to bring innovation into education, but only if we design it in such a way that we actually amplify what we already know about learning and teaching and really connect that with our designs of artificial intelligence. And as we all know, since the release of generative AI and especially ChatGPT in 2002, there's been a lot of discussion about the role of AI in education and also the type of AIs that we're using in classrooms. And I think it's very important to make a distinction between what we call educational AI, so education AI really being designed for use in educational context, and more general purpose AI that is really more off-the-shelf AI solutions that people can use in education. Now, both of them can drive innovation, but it's just very important to think very carefully about how you're using them and which one of those you are using. And if I think about a future in which we use AI, I'm really thinking about educational AI that is being developed together with teachers, together with students, really making sure that the knowledge that we have about learning and teaching is actually incorporated in the design, and that teachers can actually connect into these design in such a way that it amplifies their current teaching practices and their instructional models. And this is by no means easy, and it's also not what we currently see. If we just recently did a number of reviews, and we found that only about half of the student-faced AI is informed by our theories about learning, and only 1/3 of teacher-faced AI. So there is a major gap between what we know about learning and teaching and what we're actually using to use AI in the classroom. So there's a lot of potential there. And then what is another really important thing to note is that it is quite hard for teachers to actually use it to innovate their practices, because you need very specific solutions for that. And so it's super important to integrate teachers' ideas about the uses of AI in the actual design process of educational AI. And that hardly ever happens. So that's what we're trying to do at NOLI.
Yeah, that's actually also like leading right to the next question that we have. We find it really remarkable that you actually kind of live that approach of collaboration between teachers, researchers, and technology developers. And we know that designing AI systems that actually enhance pedagogical knowledge really kind of requires that. So we would love to know from you, maybe share one or two, maybe just one practical example from your experience and from your work of how that can work, like how you can kind of tinker this between these different groups, and mainly how you like help teacher voice in this, basically.
Yeah, so NOLI really came from an experience that had a UNESCO conference for AI in education in 2019, where we drafted the Beijing Consensus. And this is probably one of the first times that we're really, from a more policy perspective, we're looking at the use of AI in education. And we realized that most of the AI being developed for schools at the time was really coming from either the big tech or the big publishers. And there's very little voice for teachers in that space. So what we started to do at NOLI is develop a co-creation program that is always driven from the demands of teachers. So teachers indicate which problem situations that they're facing in their day-to-day classroom, what they would like to do, and then we, together with our team of scientists, think with them in how that could be connected into questions that can be answered potentially with AI. And the moment we find questions and problem situations that are meaningful, we connect the scientists. So we ask people to really bring in the state-of-the-art knowledge about learning and teaching, and we connect the businesses. So we connect companies that are actually capable of developing these solutions. And in that triangle, there is a 3-year collaboration between the teachers that are actively involved throughout all of these processes, the scientists and the business entrepreneurs, and together they work on this new innovation in a concept phase in which they elaborate on what they want AI to do in this particular context, in a design phase in which teachers are actually working with the initial designs in their classroom to refine the functionality and really make sure that it connects well into their teaching practices, and then in a validation phase in which we actually test across multiple teachers if this solution is helping to maintain new solutions. So one of the we have 18 projects up and running right now, and we have another 10 coming out, and they're very diverse. They're running from students in primary education, working, for instance, with the sensoric materials from Montessori to see how they're building these different understandings and helping teachers to provide a more intense idea about how these children's playing and working with the materials actually helps them develop these knowledge constructs and learn with that, and really provide in-depth information about the processes that students go through, to solutions for secondary schools where students can, for instance, be in classrooms for informatics, and there's a huge diversity in the classroom. Some students already know how to code, others have never touched any coding languages before. Now, how are you going to teach in that space, and how do you make sure that AI is actually helping you do that? And so we're developing new solutions with AI for the teachers to navigate that very diverse space within their classrooms. So you have many different examples that we're working on, always in this triangle between teachers, scientists, and entrepreneurs.
I see that there is like a commonality between the answers of Inge, Pete, and Francisca, and it's the participation of teachers. The participation of teachers in the professional development of other teachers, in the informal leadership within schools, and in the design of programs to better use AI in the classroom. So we've heard about what's happening in the classroom, in the schools, and even in research labs. But what does all of this mean for how we think about the profession more broadly, and how a system can support meaningful change? And for that, we have our fourth panelist, and we are really happy that she's joining us today, Linda Darling-Hammond. Linda, your work has shaped the way many of us think about teaching, not just as a set of practices, but as a profession with depth, with purpose, and with societal importance. You've worked at every level of the system, the founding president of the Learning Policy Institute, professor emeritus at the Stanford University, and a key advisor on national education policy in the US. And we are very keen to hear what you think about the moment we are currently in. So Linda, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I would just add to that little bio that you gave that I started out as a high school English teacher in public schools and have helped to start several schools in the United States. So it's important that policy be rooted in practice, that it really understand teaching and learning. So that's a passion of mine, is to think about how the system really supports the work of teachers and the redesign of schools. And Francisco really started us off well with like an image of the kind of schooling that we're talking about here, in terms of schooling that is relational, in which we design schools so that they can allow teachers to be really engaged and knowledgeable about their students and supportive of their students. Learning that is deeper learning, that is really focused on purpose and action and deep understanding and community connected. And those are things that were not at the heart of the design of the industrial school model that we have inherited across the world, and that everyone is really trying to push on to try to make room for the kind of learning that we need in this age that we're currently in. I often use the example of the way in which Google, which is right up the street from me here in Silicon Valley, has looked at what is needed in their workplace. They did a huge study of the ways in which transcripts and grades and test scores predicted success at Google. They found out that none of those things predicted success at Google. And what they decided was the feature that was really the predictor was what they call learning ability. The ability of someone to come in, take an unstructured problem, understand how to find resources, put them together, work with others, collaborate, design a solution, test it themselves, and self-correct the work, to be self-managing, and then able to, continue to evolve the thinking and the capacity of themselves, the team around them, and then to design and develop these kinds of products. So that learning ability is what we have to focus schools on at this point. It's not transmission teaching anymore, where the teacher is the sage on the stage and knows everything and says it, or says, read the chapter and then I'm going to give you a test and then we're going to go on to the next chapter. We have to move to a place where kids are really engaged in meaningful problems that are structured to illuminate some of the key concepts and knowledge points in the curriculum, of course, and that teachers are there really in a personalized way supporting them, as well as in an intellectual way. So I just loved what Francisco started us off with, and I think we've heard more about that from Piet and from Inga. Key to that then is how do you think about what teachers need to know and be able to do to work in that way? And some people come to teaching with that orientation and have had that experience themselves, but many teachers will come without having had experiences like that, powerful, deeper learning experiences. They may not have been in relational school settings. And so we have to think about the work that teachers do. I would say that with respect to teacher education, we need to be thinking about how the science of learning and development, which is emerging now, is really should inform what teachers learn and do. A lot of the ideas that we had when we invented the industrial school model have been proven false. Things like, don't smile until Christmas, spare the rod and spoil the child. These are US aphorisms. I don't know how far they've traveled around the world, but a very strict punitive system in which you put kids on the assembly line and they move in a standardized fashion to be stamped with, a lesson because it was assumed that everybody would learn in the same way. All of those things we know to be false. We also know that children are not human beings, are not, their potential is not determined by their genes. Genes actually follow experience. So it's the experiences we have that determine what we can know, what intelligences we develop, and how we develop them. So potential is really visible in environments that are designed to show it. So teachers have to learn how to create those environments. They have to learn how to support a setting in which kids feel trust and care and love, as Francisca noted at the beginning, where they then can do their best work because their brain will be active, where they will experience lots of inquiry opportunities because that's what triggers the brain to work with a lot of support and scaffolding. Teachers need to learn those things, how to manage classrooms like that. I believe that one of the big elements of teacher education for the future is that we have to have teachers working in those schools, like the ones that Francisca teaches in, and but perhaps also Piet, where these kinds of practices are commonplace. You can't learn about something from a lecture or a book and apply it in practice if you haven't experienced it yourself and seen it yourself. So we're developing in many countries programs that have people in schools that are following the same mission as the teacher education program, where they're working together as professionals and in a combined way, where teachers will experience deeper learning practices, where they will experience a relational setting in which they can learn to work with students, where they'll learn how to become advisors as well as teachers. And those clinical practice settings allow them to have a completely integrated approach to learning to teach. The other thing that's been stressed here, and I'll just stress it again, is the importance of teacher collaboration. So teachers need to learn how to be collaborative agents in their school environments, how to learn from one another, and then the environment needs to provide the time and the opportunities for that to happen. So we have to redesign preparation as we're redesigning schools and link the two closely together.
That's wow. That's a lot of food for thought, Linda. Just one question. To make all these changes happen, I would say they need to be systematically supported at the policy level. You said at the beginning that one of the factors that can make policies effective is to have teachers participating in the design of these policies. What other factors would you say distinguish effective policies that manage to sustain this kind of professional innovation?
Years ago, I started thinking and writing about something I call professional policy. Professional policy is policy that invests in teachers with preparation, with supports for learning, with opportunities for ongoing collaboration and so on. Those are policies that make those things possible, rather than trying to mandate what teachers do or engage in the remote control of teaching. Some of you may know the work of Lee Shulman, who wrote a very classic article years ago about the fact that you cannot control teaching from afar and say teachers should do. People try to control teaching through curriculum, through testing, through a variety of other things, and depending on the setting. But ultimately, teaching cannot be standardized because students are not standardized. And if you want to be effective as a teacher, you need to have the room to do what is needed for the students who are there before you. So the policies need to enable you to become well prepared. You need to enable you to understand standards of practice that are rooted in the science of learning, need to allow you to have that time to collaborate. And so I think those are important, rather than trying to sort of, puppet teachers from afar with various other kinds of mandates. The other thing that I think is really important is policies that do allow for the redesign of schools. We have a lot of policies that hold the old system in place. And we're going to have to, in this moment, this is a very dynamic moment across the world. Things are changing rapidly, not only because of AI, but we've got, democracies in crisis. We've got all kinds of other things that are happening. We've had still the ongoing after effects of the pandemic, et cetera. All of those things are forcing us to have to think differently. And we have to allow the school to redesign in the ways I've described. And then I think a key thing that needs to be redesigned is assessment, because assessment is being used in, it's a tool of policy. And as long as we are committed to sort of the assessments that are testing whether kids have memorized, the facts that, from a transmission teaching curriculum, we're not going to allow education to be as purposeful, as deep, as meaningful, and to develop learning ability and to demonstrate learning ability that we need. And that then will constrain the work of teachers. So all of those, I think, are areas of policy that can use a lot of work right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, really interesting what you're describing. Also, I mean, it poses a bit the question of like what kind of skills are kind of required for teachers in the future, who else can be involved in this project or in this process. And it links really well also with what we've heard before. It's quite interesting to see that you really emphasize something that also a teacher says, and a teacher kind of calls for a school leader. So it's really kind of the whole system that comes together for this. So thanks to all of you. That was a lot of interesting thoughts and interesting inputs. And we have a lot of questions from the audience. We received a lot of them already before the webinar even. So maybe just quickly again on that aspect of bringing other actors as well into educational innovation. There was one question from Samir who asked, how can schools and education systems maybe better connect with the labor market and also with other parts of the private sector, and to which extent that is desirable? And we were thinking maybe, Pete, if you would like to have a first go on this, but also anyone else who wants to say something about this, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, and for this, please, we ask all the panelists to turn on their cameras. We
Right.
want to start with Pete,
Yes.
but maybe if the other ones want to jump in, please raise your hand or use the button to actually raise your digital hand.
And first thing, I'm going to be very, let's say, a bit contrarian and say, why only the private market? It's perhaps a sign of the times that we really think the private market is the only place where students can thrive, even with a school like mine, who is, well, really focused on everything who has to do with economics in the grand scale of things. Our internships are not only with companies or institutions, but also with NGOs, with schools, because if you want to go to real learning, if you want to have outcomes that are successful, you have to look at society. And society is more than just the labor market per se, or the definition per se. They will gain not only useful experiences that way, but a bigger picture of what the entirety of life after school can be a bigger picture of what their network can be, and the social antennas that they will develop. And that's something that we as an institution should be aware of. And I'm very lucky that in Europe we have things like Erasmus that allow our students to go have internships or to visit other countries within Europe. And that's something that was very important. Every student of mine, they have the opportunity at least a few times to go and visit, work, or learn in different countries and to assimilate different cultures, because otherwise their cultural capital, as their social and economical capital, will stay very low. And it's really rooted in transformative learning, where they really go into to fight on their own pre-notions what it will be, and that will make them more adaptable for studies in academics or even going straight into the labor market.
Thank you very much, Pete. Is there anyone else who wants to jump into that question? There is also a question from Tracy Rosen, that asked, quite similar to what Pete was saying, what role can local communities and cross-sectoral partners play in shaping more responsive and inclusive education?
Can you say the question again, and maybe we
Of
can
course.
think together
Yeah.
about what it's getting at?
What role can local communities and cross-sectoral partners play in shaping more responsive and inclusive education?
I think one of the things that we're very engaged in the U.S. is illustrative of that. We're working to develop community schools. California has 2,500 community schools now, which are designed to both kind of bring community resources together in the school. A community school organizer is part of this, but that means, resources for health and mental health and for after school and for recreation and for engagement with students, internships, externships. So lots of ways of connecting the school to the resources of the community, but also to have a shared decision-making process with the teachers in the school, the parents, the families, the community representatives, as part of figuring out what the school needs, what the students need, and then thinking together and working together to engage those resources and to help guide the directions of the school. Some of those community schools, and we're seeing, by the way, very important in our very high-need communities where we have high rates of students, experiencing poverty, homelessness. Those resources are important, but it's also allowing students to feel really connected in the school and the community to be connected in shaping it. We also have some of those schools that are engaged in linked learning, which is a industry connection for a school that might be a school of health professions and biomedical sciences. And for example, we have one in Oakland, which is very successful. And the kids are learning their content tied to the industry theme and getting internships in the local hospitals and so on. And so I think that's yet another way that community connection can be forged. And what we saw during the pandemic was that these schools were the places where kids did not absent themselves, where they did not experience the levels of absenteeism because they could both reach to the communities and the families, and the school was a safe and engaging place for kids to want to be.
Yeah, that's super interesting. We actually recently had a talk from someone, from some Stanford professor at the OECD, who also told us about the success of community schools during the COVID pandemic and afterwards, and that these were really the places where most students came back immediately, even if there were closures, and even throughout closures where they were mostly attending for remote learning. So I think that's a super interesting thing to look into. Maybe to some other question in the audience. Of course, there were many, many, many questions related to AI, and we might direct them in your direction, Inge. There was one, for instance, that was also a little bit about the role of social and emotional skills in the AI era, so to say. And I mean, I don't really think that these things are contradictory and that we're all going to be socially incapable when we engage more with technology. But what do you think are the most important skills that we should try to maybe protect or foster in an era where there might be a lot of individualized learning that might impact a little bit students' sociability or empathy and other skills?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question, Lydia. And in fact, I hope we can actually move beyond personalized learning, because that is one thing you can do with AI, but it's not the most exciting thing from a teaching perspective. And it actually is very much aligned with the more industrial approaches that we just heard Linda and Francesca and Pete already talk about. So if we want to break open that and work towards upscaling, I think we need to be much more creative in our instructional designs. And really think about other ways to use AI in collaborative learning and in creating new elements. I think the biggest challenge that we're currently looking at is making sure that children are actually going to be involved in the learning designs that we're creating. I think that is our biggest issue at this point in time. It's so much easier to now just generate answers to homework or just continue to use different AI sources for essay writing. So really trying to motivate children to be involved in their learning and use AI in an innovative and creative way, as opposed to a disturbing way, is our biggest challenge. And as they have a choice, metacognition, the way that you learn to plan and monitor your own learning, and regulate your learning is super essential, because they need to start becoming aware that this is actually about their own learning as opposed to just ticking the boxes. And this is exactly what the other speakers have been speaking to as well. We can use AI for this, but we have to start using it in a different way.
Francisca, can we push you for an answer? In this AI, in this new AI world, what are the human-centered skills that the education system should prioritize?
Yeah,
Sure.
the question was for me, sorry.
Yeah, I was sorry, Francisca, but then Inge can jump in as well.
Sorry. So yeah, I think it's really complex. I think we're all being challenged through this AI era. But reinforcing first what Inge was saying is that while we're still focusing on an education that is like centered on what grade I am going to get after this activity or after this task, then AI will be like a tool that is not really needed. We need to get our students engaged and involved in what they're learning. And that means that we really make sense of curriculum. We first, like I always say, like let's first decide what issues we want to bring into the classroom, and then look to the curriculum to search for the opportunities to abort or to work into that problem or issue, not the other way around, right? So how do we move from a culture that it's concentrated on like rote memorization? And that's what we're still seeing in schools. Like there's not like critical thinking, and there's no the importance about, I don't know, how do you communicate effectively? That's not an answer that you're going to get in AI, right? Or how do you recognize different perspectives? And how do I decide how to deal with this problem or issue, seeing different perspectives? That's all things that our students can be supported by AI, but they really need themselves to get involved. And again, I insist, we need to bring real world issues into the classroom, real problems, local and global problems into the classroom, and then AI will be an amazing tool, but it's not the answer. If the answer is just 0.5 seconds away in Google or 0.5 seconds away in AI, then it's not a good question, right? And we need to make good questions in classroom.
Exactly. Someone in the comments were saying this is not critical thinking; it's more like spoon feeding. Inge, do you have a reply to that?
Yeah, I totally align with this. And this is also, if you look at the whole quest to upskill, to make humans more competitive in this world, this is exactly the type of education that you would like to do. So Francisco, keep going, and I hope you can inspire a lot of teachers to do this and move forward in this way.
I just want to note in the chat, because there's so much chat going on, that Yvette Larson is talking about co-creating units with students. And you can imagine doing that with AI,
Yep.
which would be really an interesting. They've got to learn to master it and to understand how to be the master of the tool rather than the subject of the tool.
Yeah, again, some teacher agency and student agency in this tech era that we're living is key to keep the education aligned with what the teachers need and the student need. We are sadly entering the last phase of our webinar, the last 5 minutes. Some people call it clutch time. And for that, we have one last question for our panelists. We'll ask you to keep it as brief as possible, maybe just 1 minute answer. And we've talked today so much about innovation and so much about change. But for this last question, we wanted to ask you, what is something about the teaching profession that you think that you think should be kept as it is today and should be protected in the future?
Okay,
It
so
are humans who teach and it are humans who learn. And doesn't really matter where you're going from which city that you're coming from. That makes us all vulnerable to make mistakes, and we should all accept also to make mistakes as teachers. We ask our students to trust us and say it's all right to make mistakes. And same goes both ways. As a teacher, you should be obliged to make your own mistakes and go further away from that.
Sounded like you're about to say something, Francisca.
yeah, I don't know if I'm quite answering the question, but I think in this era, what is really important is, and I think I know this kind can be like I don't know the word in English. Okay, but still, I know there's a lot of discussion about this, but I'm gonna insist on this. Schools are important places for our kids to attend. We need children going into schools. Like, I know there's a lot of, we're in a digital area and everything, but schools are microcosms of democracy. Schools are places where students learn to relate to one another. They learn the importance of differences. They learn to build their own identity in comparison and in contrast to one another. We learn to solve problems. And schools are probably the most important place in our society. So we need to protect schools and everything that goes on there. And I totally agree with Pete, like places where we can make mistakes, where we develop our growth mentality, and where we learn from one another. So that's would be my idea.
And I would just plus one on the learning from one another. I think schools are communities, and so they are places where people, adults and children, are learning from one another, and where if we design them in the right ways, educators are learning from one another and sharing their practices. And the whole idea of a profession is that we have some shared practice that we are able to learn together. So when it works well, that is something that absolutely needs to be protected and preserved. There was an OECD study a while back from one of the TALIS surveys that found that teachers who have multiple opportunities for collaboration of various different kinds are much more likely to use and to innovate, to engage in innovative practices, as well as to feel efficacious and to want to stay in the profession. So all of those things are self-reinforcing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And this goes for all innovation around education, also with technology. And that's also why teacher voices and teacher practices and the opportunities for them to be sharing those are super important in this innovative age as well. And I just want to highlight, we should really drive for interactions in school. And I think that's been pointed out by the previous speakers as well. You learn together, we learn through social interaction, and it's super important to keep that at the heart of our education system. And I think we can possibly even do a little bit better there than what we're doing today. So let's try and see if we can boost that social activity within schools, also by having teachers interact more together.
Yeah, I think that's really, really a great way to wrap this up. And I think, yeah, as you all said, schools as physical places that really bring together people and that are democratic hubs and community hubs, that's really something that is worth safeguarding with all this innovation we talked about today. And yeah, just in general, what you said, that innovation is not really just about making things differently, but it's really about creating the conditions where some kind of thought will also evidence-based and also context-sensitive change can grow and practice can grow. So yeah, just once again, thank you so much, Linda, Pete, Francisca, and Inge for joining us today. It was so interesting to talk to you. And we're really happy we had you with us today.
Yeah, and thank you to the audience as well that joined us today. We had over 300, almost 350 participants in that really active chat We hope that you really enjoy the webinar today and the conversation, and that this conversation continue in your own networks and system. This webinar is recorded and will be published soon enough in our YouTube page. If you want to keep up to date with the upcoming webinars, please visit our website and our social media accounts. Thank you very much again. This is all for today. I hope you have a good afternoon, night, or even morning in some places.
Yeah, take care.
Ciao, take care.